morning, campers, and welcome to Lotus Operations. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about, once again, the potential chance if a nuclear strike does happen. And we are going to be basing this information off of a 10 kiloton nuke, which is used more in missiles and small bomb-like weapons, is what the danger zones would be, what you would expect in each danger zone, and basically what would take place in that time frame. So let's begin. Okay guys, so when a 10 kiloton nuke, now 10 kiloton nukes are not nukes that are normally like used that often. They're your more smaller yield nukes, so they would be more like missiles, vehicles, you know, your smaller stuff like bombs, things like that, not your ICBMs. Your ICBMs would be your megaton nukes, and those are way bigger, and that's a lot more to worry about. But today we're going to focus on the more plausible ones that could be utilized, which would be the 10 kiloton nukes for more controlled explosions in certain areas. And with the 10 kiloton nuke, when the bomb goes off, it's going to cover about 4 miles radius. That is from the initial explosion all the way to the final end of the blast wave, to where you would be able to survive at the edges of it. But the very first thing you're going to have to worry about when a 10 kiloton nuke goes off would be the initial air blast damage, which would kill people up to 0.3 miles from the initial blast of glass shards and objects flying from them from the initial air blast. After that, you're going to have to worry about the heat from a 10 kiloton nuke, which could get up to 1,000,000 degrees, and which would cause blindness and thermal burns up to a half a mile away, 0.4 to half a mile away, depending upon the area that you are in. Okay, so once you have the air blast and the initial heat that you get through, the next phase, if you survive those two, because you got 50% dead from the air blast, 50% of those people will be dead from thermal burns from the initial blast. And then you've got your initial radiation. Now, your initial radiation to the detonation of the 10 kiloton nuclear warfare is going to be within the first minute of the explosion, for basically until it starts to die out before the secondary radiation comes in. Now, the initial radiation will kill up to 50% of the population, whether within hours or to days after the blast, up to 3/4 of a mile away from the initial blast site. So that's going to be your initial radiation. That's going to be localized to 3/4 of a mile radius, so 1.5 miles in a total diameter around the nuclear explosion. You will have to worry about the initial radiation dose. Now, that is what I was telling you about in the previous video that I did, where I was talking about if you're throwing up within an hour, you're dead. If you throw up after like 4 hours, if I remember correctly, you got a 50% chance of surviving. If you throw up after 24 hours, if you don't throw up after 24 hours, you're good to go. But the people who's going to survive the initial radiation dosage are the people who are in basements, who's in underground tunnels, who is in structures that can handle the high dosage of radiations. So those are your people who's going to have the lower dosage of the radiation and have the highest chance of surviving the initial radiation from the nuclear 10 kiloton blast wave. Now, once you get done with the initial radiation, you have to worry about the ground shocks. The ground shocks from a nuclear detonation will be like localized earthquakes. Now, those are not as critical unless you are in buildings who are already weakened by the nuclear explosion. And the main things you're going to have to worry about those be like broken gas lines, water lines, electrical lines, stuff like that who's still active or who still could explode, or buildings that could fall on top of you. So those are going to be hard to determine, because it would depend upon where the nuke hits. If it hits fault lines, if it hits, you know, depends upon the ground of exactly what would be taking place, what type of ground your buildings are on, stuff like that. So that stuff will vary, but that is something that you have to watch out for after the explosion, is collapsing buildings and other stuff like that due to the earthquakes that a nuclear weapon will cause. After that, you got to worry about the secondary radiation. Now, the secondary radiation from a nuke is the one that is the more dangerous one. That is all the radiated particles and dust particles and debris that will be put up into the atmosphere and that will fall back down to 10 minutes later, like I was telling you. And they can travel up to 6 miles away downwind from the blast site, depending upon the weather conditions. Now, some weather conditions will keep them more localized. Other weather conditions could travel them further, depending upon wind currents, speeds, weather, humidity, stuff like that. So those can change depending upon when it takes place, what the weather is doing. So that is the most riskiest, because you never know if you're actually in the direct path of the ionized particles or not. So you need to, that is where you need to do the third part of the video that I'll be doing later, of how to protect yourself from the dust particles if your structure and your house survives the nuclear weapons and you're far enough away to protect yourself. Okay guys, now let's talk about the damage zones. The first damage zone that we're going to be talking about is the light damage zone. It is the zone that has the least amount of damage. This will be taking place furthest away from the nuclear explosion, and this will basically be broken windows, scattered debris, be no worse than a major bad thunderstorm. Windows could be broken up to 10 miles away, and up to 3 miles away you would have minor damages basically caused by the 10 kiloton nuclear warfare. So those would be your safest zones. Hopefully that you are within those zones when it does go off, because that will be the least amount of damage, and then the only thing you have to worry about after that would be the radiation issues and the fallout. The next zone that you have to worry about is the MD zone, the moderate damage zone. Now this zone will take place from about a mile out from ground zero, and this one basically will have more buildings that will be leveled, vehicles will be flipped over, glass will be shattered, gas lines will be broken, water lines will be broken, electrical poles will be down, so barely any will stay up. You'll have a lot more destruction. It'll almost be like in the game Fallout, if you've ever played the game Fallout, where a lot of their rubbles and their cities are still standing, but everything is destroyed. That's going to be more like your zone for that. The issues you have to worry about in the moderate level zone is the hazards from the gas, the water, the electricity, if electricity is still flowing, and you got to worry about now the increased radiation levels, because as you get closer to ground zero, the higher the radiation levels become. So that will be your moderate zone. Now, if you're stuck within those zones and you survive, and once you're able to leave, and we'll do this in the third video of how you would leave and when you would be able to leave and stuff like that, then you need to get out. Now, the only thing is if you're not able to get out of the moderate zone, the first responders will be responding to the moderate zone areas first to get all the critically people out if they are able to, and to try to help those before they help anyone else, because the light zone people barely are going to get hurt, and the moderate zones are going to be the more critical ones. The ones in the freaking severe zone, they're dead, they're gone. There's no hope for those puppies. But let's get to the severe zone. Hey guys, and the final zone for the nuclear weapon from a 10 kiloton nuke is the SD zone. The SD zone is the severe damage zone. Now, the severe damage zone is basically ground zero. In that zone, it will be impassable to travel through, because there will be so much rubble, and every building will be leveled. If any stands, it will basically be high reinforced buildings. The only survivors will be those who will be subterranean below the ground at that time. And the radiation levels will be so high that first responders and survivors will be very slim to none if that area is entered, until the radiation levels drop. Within that zone, you basically might as well kiss yourself goodbye and hope that you have enough supplies, if you are stuck underground, to survive at least maybe a month or more, depending upon how fast the radiation dissipates from the ground, or when they're able to actually bring the survivor of the first responders in to help out survivors. So, and the severe zone ranges from ground zero, from exactly where the nuke bust, to a half a mile out. That is your severe zone range within the nuclear areas. Okay guys, so hopefully y'all found this video kind of helpful. The 2 links that I got all this information from when I was doing my research, I will leave the links on my website and posted below in the description, so in case y'all want to read this. And that is the general gist of all the zones that the detonation from a 10 kiloton nuke that we would have to worry about if one went off. Hope y'all found this information helpful, and stay tuned for part 3, in which we're going to talk about if you're stuck within the light zones, how you can protect yourself from the radiation until you're able to leave the area and get to a safer ground. So Lotus Operations out. Y'all stay safe and always be prepared.